when you take a look at the battlefield here, not the literal battlefield, but the landscape of Israel and Palestine, what you have is something that in many ways goes all the way back to biblical days. Abraham, who's the father of all nations, had two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael became the father of Islam. Isaac became the father of Judaism and on to become the father of Christianity. So the conflict that exists between Palestine, a Muslim country or a Muslim group, and Israel, a Jewish, largely predominantly Jewish group, essentially is the generational ongoing conflict between Isaac and Ishmael.
And is there, so forgive me, dear listeners, but I think of this as a story and a very powerful story, but one designed to convey things at each branch. So between the brothers, I have to imagine there was a tale that we learn about each brother. Each brother represents something. What do the brothers represent?
So I am not creative enough, I think, to speak to the literary element of
Jordan Peterson. No, for real. Like, this is his whole shtick.
Yeah.
Like, showing how basically modern humanity can be read through the lens of religious
Ancient
traditions
story.
and what those stories tell you. Most people haven't read his book, Maps of Meaning. It is unbelievably good. Anyway, so that part we don't have. We have a dot point that has a gap. Maybe we won't be able to fill it in here, but I get your point. So we've got the two brothers.
Yep.
They create two different traditions.
And they both have valid claim all the way back to the biblical.
A valid claim of what?
A valid claim all the way back to biblical and or Quranic tradition to being tied to the father of all nations.
Okay. What does that matter?
Because for both of them, what they're really trying to say is that they have a right to survive in equality, that they are tied to the father of all nations.
But does this come down to, hey, we're tied to the father of all nations, and that manifests as dirt? And so this dirt and rock is rightfully mine.
I think that's the oversimplified way that the Western world has.
Is it oversimplified, or is that really what, like, at some point this manifests as something either ideological or tangible?
So the place where it becomes tangible and ideological is in the end of World War II. At the end of World War II, the Jewish diaspora that had been hunted and killed by the Nazi Party needed a country of their own. And because other countries in the world didn't want to take on the refugees, they essentially took them all to the Palestinian state that is now known as Israel. And the Western allies granted the boundaries of Israel and said, this is where the Jews should live. This is where Jerusalem exists. This is where this is their homeland, where they were born, where they came from.
Going back to the brothers.
But the Palestinian Muslims were already there. They had never been displaced from their homeland. So by having the West create a nation state, create boundaries and everything for a group of religious people, Jews that were persecuted during World War II, now all of a sudden the West defined the organizational national structure of Israel. And that's where the conflict really started, because now you had Western allies saying this is the Jewish state defining itself as Israel, the Palestinian diaspora, who were now being forced from their own homeland, saying, but we were already here. Like, this is Jerusalem is the city where Muhammad ascended into heaven. Like, this is a holy place for us too. And so the West was just like, well, then you can both share it. We're going home, right? We got a party after VE Day. We're done here. And that's where everything started. From there, you also then had Western powers funding and fueling the economic success of Israel.
And by the way, I just want people listening at home, you are providing a very fast painting. I know enough to know that there's, God only knows how much history of conflict before 1948, where these boundaries are laid and all that stuff. I just want people to understand this is an exercise in how to think through a difficult problem.
Right.
This is not a one-for-one accurate representation of everything. You will need a far longer video from experts in this field. We go into this conversation fully understanding that. But I do think, to the initial framing of this episode, I think it's very important to understand what I'm trying to do. I think putting your head down is the wrong move at this particular moment in history. There are probably times that come and go throughout history where it is okay to put your head down. And for the first 40 years of my life, I had my head down and it worked out wonderfully. But this moment feels different. Now, that could be a mirage. Maybe it's just my age and everybody sort of pokes their head up at this point in their age and starts thinking the way that I'm thinking. I don't know. But this moment really does feel different to me. And we'll get into AI and some other things later. I think there are a lot of threats on the board right now. Certainly AI, technology, social media, all of that. We talked about velocity and volume of information earlier. All of that's at play. So anyway, I just want to set that stage so the comments doesn't waste time with like the boring shit. Like, because yes, simplistic viewpoint here from the setting of the table, we'll talk, okay, but what do you do now?
Right.
And what I really hope, because I think that the comments are going to end up being a big part of what makes this episode useful to a larger audience. So I hope that we can eliminate some of the more, I don't want people to get bogged down in the wrong thing. So yes, many details to talk about. We just need to set a quick table so that then we can talk about things like, hey, when humans have a historical conflict over who has a right to the land without getting lost in the minutia of that, how do you move forward? And that just, again, so we're setting the table. Sorry.
No, so it's fair. So I'll set the table faster too.
No. I don't need you to set it faster because I know no matter how much you do, we're not going to get there. The more detail you have, give it to me for sure.
Fair enough. So then what ended up happening was now we have, as the West places the Jewish diaspora into Israel and supports the establishment of a Jewish state, we then also have the responsibility of the West in fueling the economy for the Jewish state. Because you can't, we did the same thing in Japan. We're going to rebuild. There's economic benefits to the United States in rebuilding foreign countries. There's economic benefits in having allies that you help economically rebuild. So fast forward till today, and now you have Israel had this massive boost economically from Western partners and Western allies when they were placed in Israel. The Palestinian counterparts did not have access to that financial benefit that the Israelis did. So there's, like you said, decades of conflict between Israelis and Palestinians, and everything's documented out there, and there's 1,000 ways that you can look at it and interpret it and whatever else. But in the end, what happened was the Palestinians, through the lens of most Muslim countries, became oppressed, became ostracized from their own land, their own nation, where they could thrive and to build an economy and build a political establishment and build a legacy for their future. Because that land was being supported and developed by the Jewish state, and the Jewish state and the Muslim state just didn't want to get along for a number of reasons that we don't really have a say in because we didn't live there at the time. Right. And that's how I interpret the many years of historical conflict between Palestinians and Israelis in that country. The place where we have to fast forward this to is till 1997. In 1987, Hamas became a political group that was supporting Palestinians in their fight to resist what was perceived to be Israeli oppression. Hamas became the more aggressive group versus the Palestinian Authority, which became what's known as a secular group or a non-religious group. And those became the two political powers vying for support from the Palestinian people. And at the time in 1987, the vast majority of that support went to the Palestinian Authority, not to Hamas. Hamas's promise at the time was, we will destroy the Israeli country and we will return the entire country back to the Muslim people. Not a religious war. They weren't going after killing Jews. They were trying to destroy Israel. Not that it makes it that much better, but at least to clarify what their ambitions were in 1987. Nobody determined that Hamas was a terrorist organization in 1987, despite their claim, despite their promise to eradicate Israel. In 1997, following major terrorist attacks inside the United States, the peak being the Timothy McVeigh bombing in Oklahoma City, the United States became very focused on terrorism and counterterrorism. And in 1987, they created the terrorist watch list. or the Foreign Terrorist Organization list. And in that list, they listed every Muslim extremist group as a terrorist organization. On that list, Hamas was included. So at that moment in time in 1997, based on what was happening in the United States in their struggle with extremism, they targeted Muslim extremism as one of the many extremisms that they would list as terrorist organizations. That's why even today, the United States lists Hamas as a terrorist group, where most of the rest of the world does not. There's even there's only 12 countries total that list Hamas as a terrorist organization. And in many ways, it's because those 12 countries, those 11 countries take the lead, they follow the lead of the United States. The UN as an organization does not list Hamas as terrorist. So in 1997, Hamas becomes a terrorist group, but they're this terrorist group that also has a political arm that's supporting and taking care of the Palestinian people within Gaza. That's already kind of a mess. That becomes complicated, right? Palestine can't create a standing army. They can't create their own standing economy. They can't create foreign trade. They can't create anything significant because they're not recognized as a nation. So a few Muslim countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Egypt recognize the Palestinian people, but not the Palestinian state. And everybody recognizes the right of the Palestinians to a state, but nobody wants to say what that state is going to be. So that becomes a mess that most of the first world doesn't even follow, doesn't really care about until things start blowing up in Israel and Palestine. October 7th, 2023, this group known as Hamas, based out of Gaza, conducts this massive incursion. The most doctrinally correct word is it was an incursion across a border within one country, closest to a civil war, much closer to a civil war than an attack from a foreign nation, right? They carry out this incursion that uses terrorist tactics, terrorist tools, but also targets military targets for a political goal that has been stated and consistent since 1987. Now we live in this world where what is this thing that's happening? The United States labels the group as a terrorist group. However, all humanitarian aid that we send to Palestine has to go through Hamas. Like, they control the politics, they control the governance, they control the hospitals. Not terror. Al-Qaeda never controlled hospitals, right? It's not as clear as we think it is, but it's hard to get that nuance across with the velocity and volume of information. So now we live in this world where velocity and volume of information make it so that we all see the dead bodies and the crying children and the dying women on the Palestinian side, but we also read about the atrocities that were executed against these Israelis in a surprise attack on October 7th. We're faced with all the information, and there's no clarity as to what's really the nuance, what's really the battlefield, what are we really looking at here? So you've got Israel trying to counter what they know is a threat to their national sovereignty, but they've also got a problem with a group that was created because of the oppression they put on the Palestinian people. And that is what the group states is their whole core purpose. The reason they exist at all is because of that oppression. So you've got this absolute mess that the world is watching play out day to day, but at the same time, the world isn't invested enough to actually try to resolve the conflict.